Alrighty, everybody. This is part 3 of reviewing Simon Sinek doing a speech to a graduating class. In the first 2 parts, we broke down how to do strong openings, using little slogans to kind of to kind of deliver the point, using a sentence structure in a repetitive way, silence, and then how to practice so you have different speeds when you're speaking to emphasize different types of energy. And now we watch more of Simon Sinek to see what else we can learn. Yes, I also agree.
We're often told that we all have to be better listeners. You should listen more, we're often told. But the problem is, as human beings, we communicate. And communication involves both listening and speaking. So simply telling people to be a better listener is actually not very helpful advice. Nelson Mandela is...
That was a nice little bit. What would have happened, just as an extra little tweak, if he would have started that section, I'm going to rewind a little bit, with a question. How do you know someone's listening? Because sometimes when you ask that a question, for 1 or 2 seconds, it's the only thing people are thinking about. So why not do it here? Imagine if this little part here, he would have started off, how do you know someone is listening? Well, we're often told to be better listeners, and he just goes into it like that, just to see.
So simply telling people to be a better listener is actually not very helpful advice. Nelson Mandela is regarded as one of the world's great leaders. And the reason Nelson Mandela is a very important case study is because he is universally regarded as a great leader. No matter what country you go to in the world, people will acknowledge.
Notice something that he's done here. And you know how sometimes people tell you that, like a story follows a narrative, it's a journey? Or a good presentation should kind of follow steps in like an order that you can predict. Here's a counterintuitive approach. What does this listening thing have to do with Nelson Mandela and leadership? And you're like, it probably has to do something with listening, but you don't know how. So instead of taking a linear narrative, he's gone narrative 1, and then he plugs in narrative 2. And then he might jump back into narrative 1. I'm not sure. But probably what he's going to do is this. Narrative 1 about listening, narrative 2 about leadership, Nelson Mandela, and then refer back to narrative 1 to bring that connection together. It doesn't just have to be narrative 1, narrative 2, connection. A good story, a good movie follows 2 different plot points, and it's not till halfway or near the end of the film that they connect. And you spend that whole movie going, how are these 2 connected? Oh, a little sliver of something. And that's another way to keep you engaged. So instead of telling a linear narrative, have 2 separate narratives and chunk them.
His leadership ability. Other leaders, depending on the nations you go to, it changes. But Nelson Mandela is universally regarded as a great leader, which is why he's an important case. And a journalist once asked him, how did you become a great leader? Now, Mandela actually grew up the son of a tribal chief. And he said to this journalist, I remember when I was a boy.
Another chunk. You thought you were going to get an answer, right? So, how do you know someone's listening? Nelson Mandela's a good leader. What made you a good leader? And then, remember when I was a boy? Like another chunk. And again, how are these 3 related? We are trying to figure it out. You may think you know where he's going, but you're not sure, so you still have to listen.
I would attend tribal meetings with my father, and I always remember 2 things. 1, they always sat in a circle, and my father was always the last to speak. And this is what it means to be a great listener. It doesn't mean you don't have the opportunity to speak. It means you...
And remember back from the previous videos? Oh, now I see where you're going with this. That aha moment. Now the uncertainty that we started with is starting to make connection.
To allow others to speak before you. It is one of the greatest skills you will ever learn. To allow others to feel heard. It's the great leaders who do not start the conversation, they end it. For one, you get all the benefit of all of the smart people in the room. But most importantly, The people who are there to work with you will feel heard. And even if we know the answer, simply walking into a...
By the way, at this point, if you watch the video too, I'm just going to reference, notice the changing speeds. The heart attack idea, his speeds are different. Remember that you practice, once really fast, once really slow, once in the middle, once a little bit more fast, once a little bit, to create a diversity in the speed at which you deliver. And watch how often he's changing it up to make impact, to get people really going with what he's saying and proving the point, to build the tension for what's coming next.
Meeting, walking into a classroom to impress everybody that you have the answer makes others feel bad, and they won't want to help you in the future. Practice being the last to speak when you're on a team. It's a remarkable, remarkable skill. So I'll tell you another story. It's a personal story. It's not one that I share very often, and it profoundly changed the course of my life.
This is clickbait. This is clickbait. I'm going to tell you a little secret. Another really great idea when you're presenting, if you want to keep people engaged, you use the clickbait strategy. What's clickbait? You all know it, right? It's like stuff like when this one little thing, like they tried this one thing and look at them now. 3 things you should never do. The one secret from the person who made $1 million in 1 year. What is it? What is it? What is it? It's this clickbait so that you click to find out what it is. And he's using it here. And we can use it. There is one reason I'm standing in front of you. The secret to making yourself memorable comes down to 2 words. You won't believe how easy it is to do blank. All you have to do is what I'm about to show you. Something like that. You start off with like a number. It's usually like a number. Here's the one thing. Here's the 2 things that will change the way people react to you. And then you put it as a question. You won't believe. This was amazing. It's always some sort of qualifier. Let me just go back real quick and let's watch what he says again so we can hear it.
It's not one that I share very often.
Here.
And it profoundly changed the course of my life.
That's a clickbait. That's a clickbait right there. I'm going to tell you something that profoundly changed the course of my life. And then he keeps going.
In August of 2011, I had the opportunity to visit Afghanistan with the United States Air Force. I had done some work with the mobility forces. These are the people that fly the tankers and the cargo planes in Air Force One, all the big planes. And the general said to me, "Simon, you've gotten to know us quite well. It would mean a lot to me if you would go to either Iraq or Afghanistan to see our men and women perform their mission. Would you be willing to go?" So I said yes. They picked Afghanistan. Now, I didn't tell my parents where I was going because I didn't want them to worry. I told them I was going away with the Air Force.
Notice the
True.
speed.
I
We're
told
not
them I
sure
was
what the
going
lesson is.
to be out of touch for a while because I was going to be on a lot of planes. True. I told them I was going to Germany. True. I just didn't tell them from Germany I was going to Afghanistan.
Did you notice how are you starting to see his strategies, everybody? And they're not just his strategies. These are great strategies we can all use. He is repeating the sentence structure. Not repeating a word, but not repeating the exact same thing, but the structure of the sentence.
And I had no responsibility. I was simply going as an observer.
Cool.
I had 2
Cool.
officers who were assigned to be my escorts.
Okay.
And we met basically for the first time at Penn Station in Philadelphia, where we drove to Dover Air Force Base, where we would leave for Germany. I took a big C-5 cargo plane. In Germany, we changed planes and we got on a KC-135 tanker built in 1956. I was on a plane built in 1956, where we flew to Bagram. We landed in the middle of the night. We touched down, and the big door on the side of the plane had opened, but we hadn't gotten off the plane yet. We'd been on the ground for maybe 10 minutes, and the base came under rock.
I would say that at this point, I'll be honest, and you can see it if you rewind a little bit, you'll see it in the reactions of the listeners here. You can see when they're engaged and when they're not. Sometimes we fall into the detail trap of giving too many details to paint the picture. And because he's trying to be very dramatic when he speaks, he's starting to lose us a little bit here. Let's just be honest. He's losing us a little bit here. I don't know if we needed all these details. We'll find out, but I'm pretty sure we're not going to need to know all of these details for the moral of the story.
Rocket attack. 3 rockets hit 100 yards off our nose.
Here we go.
We'd been on the ground for maybe 10 minutes, and the base came under rocket attack. 3 rockets hit 100 yards off our nose. This is how my trip began. Now, if you've ever been in a war zone, for those of you in the room who've ever been in a war zone, you know this. You have all the feelings you're supposed to have, you just don't have them at the right times. Weirdly, I was incredibly relaxed, and maybe that's because the people I was with were incredibly relaxed and I felt safe. The panic came later. We're eventually given the all clear, and we went to our housing. Mm-hmm. Now, the purpose of being in Afghanistan, we were going to be in the country for up to 30 hours, and the goal was to witness an airdrop mission. They're not regularly scheduled, so we had to find out if there was one as soon as we got there, and it turns out there was one first thing in the morning. So we got about 2.5 hours.
I'm nowhere going to be as dramatic as Simon is here. I mean, he's such a great speaker. But if I was going to redo this chunk of the story, and in this one, because he's got the linear. Notice in the previous one, he chunked it. So you said one thing, okay, and then somewhere else. That was a great way to keep us engaged. Right now, I'm struggling a little bit. Like, it's not that it's not interesting. It's that I'm starting to go like, waiting for the moral versus going along the story with him. If I was going to do this speech, I would say, I got to know this army general. I said, would you come to talk to our troops? And I said, yes. So I hop in a plane from the 1950s to this base. We get to Germany. We get to the other town he was in, and bombs are going off. And I was calm. That's in like maybe 2-3 short sentences, what he's taken about 10, 11 sentences and a lot more time to get to. Maybe there's a point to this, but I'm just making a note. It's not that he's doing it wrong, is that I want us to be aware that sometimes we can fall into the trap of doing too many details when we're trying to tell a linear story.
3 hours of sleep, and we went and got on this airdrop mission, which was incredible. We sat in the back of a C-17. We flew about an hour and a half, 2 hours out to the middle of nowhere, Afghanistan. The plane dropped down to about 2,000 feet. The back door opened, and we sat there and watched as cargo flew out the back so we could resupply an Army forward operating base. It was an amazing, amazing experience. We then flew back to Bagram, and the goal was to come back home. There's no regularly scheduled flight, so we have to sort of find out what flights we can get on, and it's always up to the discretion of the pilots. We found a flight that was leaving shortly after we got back, and so we asked the pilots, and they said, absolutely, we can join their flight. And we waited and waited and waited and waited and waited and waited. And eventually, we got on the plane. We were all strapped in, literally 5 minutes from leaving. And the pilot walked up to us and said...
Again, it's going on a little bit now, but let's notice that how he's trying right now to get the audience back to him. I think this is what's happening. And he's doing it by increasing his speed to try and build the energy. Again, variation in speed.
I'm sorry, we need to bump you guys. We need to make more room for stretchers. It was carrying wounded warriors out of theater, and they needed our space. If there's ever a good reason to get bumped off a plane, this was it. So we got off the plane, and we went to look for another flight. And that's when we found out there were no other flights until Tuesday, and this was only Saturday. I was going to get stuck in Afghanistan for at least 4 days, maybe longer, because we don't know what we're going to get on Tuesday.
Right. Everything else has been pretty dope on. This is just going a little long, and I'm not sure. Like, what were the 2 people who we met? Where were they from? What was the first Air Force base? Why did that matter? Exactly. You can't think of it, so it didn't matter.
Tuesday, and I have no way of telling my parents. They're not going to hear from me on the date that I told them that I would get home. Immediately, every fiber of my being sank. And I remember becoming completely panicked and completely preoccupied with one thing: my happiness, my safety, and my comfort. And I didn't care who had to go out of their way to get me what I wanted. I remember there was a public affairs officer who said, "I can get you to Kyrgyzstan, but you don't have the right visa." And I looked at him and I said, "You get me on that plane. I don't talk to people like that." And I could see myself becoming this person that I hated. Some of us in the room have worked for somebody in our careers.
One thing that I think is very interesting to point out here, and this is a trap that a lot of us fall into, that he is not, that we can learn from, is that very often when we are trying to tell stories about, tell me a time that you failed to really communicate effectively, or what's something you're not good at, in job interviews, we will speak in the third person. There was a situation where I was communicating in a way that in retrospect I didn't really like, and I thought that I should, try and change the way I communicate. Nobody cares, dude. Like, nobody cares. But look how specific it was. This guy, this PR officer was talking to me, and I said, "You get me on that plane." And that's not the way I talk. It's the difference between an I statement and a they, we, it statement. Oh no, my camera froze. We are back. Okay, camera is back on, and let's keep going. The moral of the story was this: if you're going to tell a story about a situation that's maybe to show you that you're humble, or any story at all, use I statements and very specific examples. Let's go back also to the first video where I talked about mimicking. You get me on that plane. I don't talk to people like that. That little mimic, it was enough to make you imagine him in like some space, some undefined space, talking to someone who's also undefined. But that picture in your head came from the mimic.
Who wants the next promotion, and they don't care that they have to turn our lives upside down so they can get what they want. I was becoming that person. We went back to our housing, and I lay down on the bed and closed my eyes. My mind was racing. I was convinced that there would be another rocket attack on the base. I was convinced that I was going to get hit. I was convinced that my parents were going to find out that I was in
Sentence structure
Afghanistan
repetition.
when an Air Force officer knocks on the door. I was convinced. Paranoia, fear, everything that you can imagine swept over
changing.
me. One of the officers that I was traveling with said, "I'm going to see if I can get us on another flight," and he left the room. The other officer, thinking I was asleep just because my eyes were closed, said, "Well, I'm going to go to the gym then," and he walked out and turned off the lights for me. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. All I wanted to do was get out of there. I regretted saying yes. I regretted being there. I didn't want to be there. I'm in the purpose business. I write and talk about this sense of why and sense of purpose in our lives. So I started to remind myself, Simon, you need a purpose. You don't have a purpose. You need a purpose. So I started inventing one. You're here to tell their story. It worked for like a few minutes, and I would slide back into my fear and panic again. And I realized what was happening to me is I was living
and I'm just going to highlight
of an unfulfilled life.
I'm just going to highlight again that his story is very specific. He's talking about himself and specific examples, not saying, and there was this situation where I was trying to think positively and I realized that I kept falling back into negative thought. None of that general third person-y kind of talk. Very specific anecdote.
Compressed into 24 hours. I had an amazing day. I got to see something that most people will never get to see in their entire lives, except I didn't want to wake up and do it again the next day. And I think many of us do the same thing. We confuse moments of happiness with joy and fulfillment. We confuse winning a piece of business, getting a promotion, getting an award, getting recognition, doing well on a test with actual deep fulfillment. Those experiences are wonderful, but happiness is fleeting. There's not a single person in this room, absolutely zero, who's walking around with an amazing sense of accomplishment for that test that you aced a year ago. That feeling is gone.
Notice the speed change, right?
Different.
Notice that speed change?
It's something you carry with you on a daily basis, whether you're enjoying the day or not. It's like loving your family. You may not like your family every day, but you love your family every day. One is fleeting, the other is lasting. And this is what was happening to me.
That was a nice little moment. He probably could have paused. One is fleeting, the other is lasting. It's not that he did it wrong, but that's a good place to put that exclamation point.
realized that I had this amazing day and I was confusing happiness and fulfillment. And so I gave up. I lay in that bed, paranoid, scared, and depressed, and I literally gave up. I decided that if I was going to get stuck here, I might as well make myself useful. And so I decided I was going to volunteer. I would speak anywhere they wanted me to speak. I would carry boxes and sweep floors. All I wanted to do was serve some of those amazing people that I'd met on this trip. I wanted to serve those who served others. Mm-hmm. And instantly, this incredible calm came over me. I was even excited. This is what fulfillment means. It's not the fleeting joys that we may experience. It's not the accomplishments that we achieve.
It's a great message too, right? Notice again, so now he's using a different kind of repetition. Now he's using the repetition of a word. He's been saying a lot of like, happiness is fleeting, happiness is fulfillment is lasting, happiness, fulfillment. So if you only had to remember this part, you'd probably say something like, so what did he say? It was like, he said it was like, happiness is kind of just like right now, but like being fulfilled is something more. It's about having like purpose or something. That's how people actually and will remember, right? So a smart speaker, if you're going to use the word repetition, picks a couple of cool little words, right? And say, this is what's going to remind people of everything else I said.
It's the opportunity to serve those who serve others. And upon making this realization, I had nothing but joy and calm and excitement and peace. It was like a movie. The timing was uncanny. Upon making this amazing realization, the door flung open, and it was Major Throckmorton. He said, I got us on a flight that's been redirected, but we have to go now. If we don't leave now, they're going to leave without us. Where's Matt? I said, he's at the gym. So we ran to the gym, we got him off the treadmill, we ran back, no time to shower. He put his uniform back on, we grabbed all our stuff, and we ran out to the flight line. When we got out to the flight line, we could see the plane we were going to take home. See, big C-17, it was sitting right out there on the tarmac. And as soon as we got there, a security cordon came down and they wouldn't let us out to the plane. Because somewhere else on base, they were having a fallen soldier ceremony. And out of respect, when they have the fallen soldier ceremony, everything stops. And so we sat on the curb and waited. And I told the guys what I had gone through in the bed just moments ago. And I cried like a baby. And this is one of the things a lot of people don't realize about the military. Crying is just fine. Those guys kept me safe, not just physically, they made me feel safe. And I felt totally comfortable telling them what I was going through and how I felt. Eventually, the security cordon came up, and they let us out to the plane. We would be the only 3 passengers aboard this plane other than the crew. What I didn't tell you is the reason the flight was redirected is because we would be carrying home the fallen soldier for whom they just had the ceremony. The Army brought the flag-draped casket on board.
So the video is getting a little long right now, and it's a great story, but it's going. The big moral I think of this video was the linear progression. Watch out for falling into too many details to create the image. Always err on the side of less details to put a picture in someone's head, because this is a powerful story. I don't remember the first minute and a half, 2 minutes of the journey doesn't seem to matter to get to this stage. Do you know what I mean? Simon, you're killing it, buddy. There's a reason you're famous. And hopefully we're all learning something by watching you, breaking you down so we can become the next Simon Sinek.